My father didn't walk me down the aisle. He handed me over like a deed of a property he'd just sold. My mother didn't cry tears of joy. She cried because the check finally cleared. I wasn't getting a husband. I was getting a life sentence to fund my brother's addiction to the high life. And the worst part? They expected me to thank them for saving the family. My name is Clara Vance, and I am 30 years old. 2 days ago, I sat in my corner office on the 42nd floor of my firm in downtown Chicago, looking at two people I hadn't spoken to in 8 long years. My mother was clutching a worn-out purse, her eyes darting around the expensive marble floors with a mixture of awe and resentment. My father was staring at my mahogany desk with a mixture of greed and desperation. They weren't there to apologize for the day they tried to trade my soul for my brother's Jackson's car payments. No, they were there because Jackson was broke, the family home was in foreclosure, and they heard I was hiring. They stood there, expecting the workhorse to once again pull the carriage. Welcome back to the channel, where real emotions meet stories of survival and strength. If you have ever been the one your family treated like an ATM instead of a human being, this story is for you. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what your family label was. I read every single one because your voice matters here. And if you are new, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story about reclaiming your worth from the people who tried to steal it. In the Vance household, labels were the law. My brother Jackson was the star, the golden boy whose every mistake was framed as a misunderstanding. I was the backup plan, the daughter whose every achievement was met with a shrug and a request to go pick up Jackson's dry cleaning. I was 14 when I realized I was invisible. While my brother was out spending his allowance, I was the one balancing the checkbook and making sure the lights stayed on. But even I didn't realize the price they had truly put on my head until the summer I turned 22. In the Vance household, love wasn't a feeling, it was a budget, and my brother Jackson was the line item that always got funded first. If you walked down the hallway of our home in suburban Ohio, the walls told a very specific story. There were dozens of framed photos of Jackson. Jackson in his Pee Wee football uniform. Jackson at his high school graduation with that star student grin. Jackson next to the shiny red Mustang my parents bought him for his 16th birthday. And then there was me. Tucked away near the coat closet, in a frame that was slightly cracked, was a single photo of me from the 8th grade science fair. I was holding a trophy for a robotics project that none of them understood, and honestly, none of them had bothered to ask about. My mother, Martha, used to look at Jackson like he was a miracle she'd personally invented. Every time he barely passed a test or managed to stay out of trouble for a week, she'd bake his favorite pie and tell everyone on the church prayer chain about her golden boy. I was 14 the first time I realized I was running the house. My father, Gerald, was a man who preferred silence to conversation, and my mother was too busy managing Jackson's social schedule and his growing pains to notice the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. I started balancing the checkbook because I was tired of the lights flickering when the payment was late. I became the person who knew when the property taxes were due, which pharmacy had my mother's prescriptions, and exactly how much we were over budget because Jackson needed new designer cleats for a team he'd eventually quit. My parents called this responsibility. They'd say, "Clara is so dependable, we don't even have to worry about her." That was the trap. Being dependable meant being invisible. It meant while Jackson was out at parties, I was at the dining table doing his homework and mine, just so my parents wouldn't have to deal with his stress. Jackson's lifestyle was a black hole that swallowed every spare dollar. By the time he was 20, he had crashed 2 cars, both of which my parents replaced within a week. He went through a startup phase where he blew $30,000 of their retirement savings on an idea that never made it past a napkin sketch. My father didn't get angry. He just cleared his throat and said, "He's finding himself, Clara. Family helps family." But when I wanted to apply for a prestigious internship in Chicago, the tone changed. "That's so far away," my mother said, not looking up from her knitting. "Who will help with the grocery runs? Who's going to help Jackson with his business taxes?" I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an unpaid administrative assistant with a room in the basement. I remember one specific Sunday dinner, roast beef and mashed potatoes, the same meal we'd had for 20 years. Jackson was bragging about a new investment he'd made, which everyone knew was just another way of saying he lost money at a casino. My parents were nodding, eyes wide with pride. I mentioned that I'd been maintaining a 3.9 GPA while working 30 hours a week at a construction firm's front desk to save for my senior year. My mother patted my hand absently. "That's nice, honey. Jackson, tell your father about the car you're looking at." That was the moment I realized that no matter how high I built my own pedestal, they would only ever use it as a footstool for Jackson. I was the backup plan. I was the safety net for a brother who never learned to walk because he knew I'd always be there to catch him. But the real weight of that realization didn't hit me until the summer I turned 22. The summer Jackson finally dug a hole so deep that my parents decided the only way out was to sell me. Before we get into the night that changed everything, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. We're building a community here for the invisible ones, the workhorses who finally decided to stop pulling the plow. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been ignored at a dinner table while someone else got the credit for doing nothing? I read every single one. Now let me tell you about Mr. Sterling and the price my father put on my future. The summer I turned 22 was the hottest on record in our part of Ohio. The air was so thick you could almost taste the humidity, but the atmosphere inside our house was even heavier. For weeks, my father had been pacing the hallways at 3 a.m., his footsteps a rhythmic thud against the floorboards. My mother had stopped humming when she cooked. Jackson, usually loud and obnoxious, was nowhere to be found. He had vanished into the city, leaving behind a trail of debt collectors and urgent notices that I was the one clearing from the mailbox every morning. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know I was the solution. It started on a Tuesday. My mother called me into the dining room. She had set the table with her best linen, the cream-colored cloth she only used for Christmas or when the pastor came to visit. My father was already sitting there, his hands flat on the table, staring at a manila folder. They looked like they were at a funeral. "Clara, sit down," my father said. His voice was gravelly, devoid of the usual dismissive tone he used for me. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Did Jackson get into another accident? Is he in jail?" My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her skin was cold. "Jackson made a mistake, honey. A big one. He invested in some overseas ventures that didn't go as planned. He owes some very dangerous people a lot of money. More than we have, more than this house is worth." I pulled my hand away. "So, let him figure it out. He's 24, Dad. How many times are we going to bail him out?" My father finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "It's not that simple this time, Clara. They're threatening legal action. They're threatening to take everything we've worked for. But we've found a way to save the family, to save Jackson, and to ensure you have a life of luxury we could never provide." That was the first red flag. Whenever my father used the words luxury and Clara in the same sentence, there was always a catch. "We want you to meet someone," my mother whispered. "A friend of your father's old business associate, Mr. Arthur Sterling." The name sounded like old money, and when we pulled up to his estate the following evening, it looked like it too. We drove 40 minutes outside the city to a gated property where the driveways were lined with perfectly manicured oaks. The house was a sprawling colonial, all white stone and black shutters, illuminated by expensive landscape lighting. It was a world I had only seen in architectural journals. As we walked through the double mahogany doors, I felt like a lamb being led into a lion's den. The foyer was filled with the scent of expensive cigars and lemon oil. A butler led us into a sunroom that overlooked a private lake, and there, sitting in a motorized wheelchair by the window, was Arthur Sterling. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen everything and felt nothing. He didn't stand, obviously. He simply tilted his head and watched us walk in. "Gerald," he said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble, "and this must be Clara." The way he said my name sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a greeting, it was an appraisal, like a man checking the teeth of a horse he was about to buy. For the next hour, I sat in a velvet chair while the adults talked over my head. They talked about mergers, family legacies, and mutually beneficial arrangements. Mr. Sterling was a widower, they explained. He had thousands of acres of land, a multi-million-dollar portfolio, but no one to manage his domestic affairs or provide companionship. Then came the hammer. Arthur has been very generous, my father said, leaning forward. He has agreed to pay off Jackson's entire debt, $300,000, the moment the marriage certificate is signed. He's also offered me a position on one of his boards. And for you, Clara, you'll never have to work a day in your life. You'll be the mistress of this estate. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at my mother, expecting to see horror on her face. Instead, she was smiling, that same performative church pew smile she used when she was trying to hide a lie. It's a blessing, Clara. Arthur needs a wife to help him, and we need to protect your brother. You've always been the dependable one. You've always been the one we could count on to do the right thing for the family. Do the right thing? I whispered, my voice shaking. You're selling me. You're literally trading me for Jackson's gambling debts. Don't be dramatic, my father snapped, the mask finally slipping. You're an architect student, Clara. Look at this house. You could spend your life designing gardens and hosting parties. Arthur is a good man. He just needs someone to take care of him, someone who understands loyalty. Mr. Sterling spoke up then, his eyes never leaving my face. I'm not a young man, Clara. I know what this looks like, but I can give you a world you've only dreamed of. All I ask is that you be here, that you belong to this house, that you belong to me. The room felt like it was shrinking. I looked at the three of them, the man who wanted to own me, the mother who was willing to dress me up for the sale, and the father who had already spent the commission in his head. I have a scholarship, I said, my voice gaining strength. I have my senior year. I have a life planned in Chicago. The scholarship won't cover the lawyers we need to keep Jackson out of prison, my father said coldly. And frankly, Clara, we've decided that your education is a luxury the Vance family can no longer afford. We've already called the university. We told them you wouldn't be returning for the fall semester. My heart stopped. What did you do? We're doing this for the family, my mother cried, the theatrical tears starting to fall. Why do you have to be so selfish? Your brother's life is on the line. This is our only chance. I looked at Arthur Sterling. He wasn't even pretending to be sympathetic. He was just watching the negotiation play out, knowing he had the winning hand. He had the money my father craved and the power my mother feared. And they had me, the backup plan they were finally cashing in. Before I tell you what I did that night, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Have you ever had your parents try to make a decision for you that felt more like a prison sentence than a choice? Drop a comment and tell me about the moment you realized you had to save yourself. I'm reading every single one. Now, let me tell you about the night I became a ghost in my own home. We drove back to our suburban house in a silence that felt like it was choking me. My parents were already discussing the wedding date, October. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally put the workhorse to her ultimate use. But as I looked out the window at the dark Ohio fields, I realized my father had made one fatal mistake. He had raised me to be the one who balances the books. He had raised me to be the one who tracks the receipts. And as we pulled into the driveway, I realized I had been keeping a very different kind of ledger for 22 years. I wasn't going to Arthur Sterling's estate, and I wasn't staying in this house. I waited until 2 a.m. The house was finally quiet. I could hear my father's heavy snoring from the master bedroom. I crept down to the kitchen, my bare feet cold on the linoleum. I didn't take much. I didn't want their clothes or their memories. I went to the hallway closet, the one where they kept the family sort boxes. I found the manila folder my father had been holding at dinner. I opened it. Inside wasn't just Jackson's debt. There were bank statements, there were letters, and there was a signed intent to marry document that my father had already signed on my behalf, like I was a piece of land he was transferring. I took the folder. I took the small shoebox of cash I had saved for my 30-hour-a-week job at the construction firm. And then I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I walked into the living room and looked at the wall of photos. Jackson's star grin, Jackson's trophies, Jackson's red Mustang. I reached up and took down the one photo of me, the science fair one near the coat closet. I didn't take the photo. I took the frame, shattered the glass on the kitchen counter with a muffled thud, and left the picture face down in the sink. By the time the sun started to peek over the horizon, I was 40 miles away, heading toward the state line. I had exactly $500 in my pocket, a stolen folder of their secrets, and a heart that had turned into a block of ice. I was 22 years old, and I was officially dead to the Vance family. Or so they thought. The silence in the car on the way back from the Sterling estate was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a family evening. It was the pressurized silence of a bomb squad waiting for a timer to hit zero. My father gripped the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles were white as bone. My mother sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. They were already spending the $300,000. I could see it in the way my father's foot tapped impatiently at every red light. To them, the deal was done. The workhorse had been led to the auction block, and the price had been met. The moment we stepped inside the house, the mask of family unity shattered. I didn't even wait for them to take their coats off. "I'm not doing it," my voice said. My voice was small, but it cut through the room like a cold wind. My father stopped mid-stride. He didn't turn around at first. He just stood there, his back to me, his shoulders rising and falling with heavy, rhythmic breaths. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I said no, Dad. I'm not a piece of furniture you can trade to settle Jackson's gambling debts. I'm not marrying a stranger so my brother can keep his lifestyle." My mother turned then, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and rehearsed heartbreak. "Clara, how can you be so cruel? We're talking about your brother's life. These people, they aren't like us. They don't play by the rules. If we don't pay them back, Jackson could lose everything. He could end up in a ditch somewhere." "Then let him," I shouted. The years of being the backup plan finally boiled over. He's a 24-year-old man who has never worked a day in his life. He crashes cars, he loses thousands at casinos, and you expect me to pay for it with my entire future? Why is his life worth more than mine? My father turned around, and for the first time in my life, I saw true, unadulterated hatred in his eyes. This wasn't the man who ignored me at dinner. This was a man who saw his bank account walking away. "Because he's the star of this family, and you're just the one who was supposed to make him shine," he roared, stepping into my personal space. "You've always been selfish, Clara. Ever since you were a child, obsessed with your little projects and your grades. You think you're better than us because you want to be an architect? You're nothing without this family, and right now, this family needs you to do your job. My job is to be your daughter, not your sacrificial lamb." The slap came so fast, I didn't even see it. My head snapped to the side, my cheek burning with the sting of his palm. My mother gasped, but she didn't move to help me. She just stood there, clutching her purse. "You will do as you're told," my father hissed, his face inches from mine. "I've already made the arrangements. If you don't marry Sterling, we lose the house. We lose everything. You want to talk about sacrifice? Fine, let's talk about it." He walked over to the kitchen phone, the old landline that felt like a relic of a past life, and dialed a number he had written on a notepad. I watched, frozen, as he spoke to the registrar's office at my university. "Yes, this is Gerald Vance. I'm calling to withdraw my daughter Clara Vance from the fall semester, effective immediately. No, there won't be any tuition payments coming. We're closing her college fund. Thank you." He hung up and looked at me with a sickening smirk. "You think your education is your ticket out? It's gone. I withdrew every penny from that account an hour before we left for Sterling's. It's sitting in Jackson's defense fund now." My mother stepped forward, her voice dropping into that manipulative, honey-sweet tone she used to use to get me to do Jackson's chores. "Honey, don't make this harder. Just go to your room and think about it. Arthur is a rich man. You'll have everything. Just say yes and we can go back to being a happy family." "We were never a happy family," I whispered, my voice thick with tears I refused to let fall. "We were a business, and I was the only employee who didn't get paid." "Then you're fired," my father said, opening the front door and pointing toward the dark, rainy street. "If you're not going to save this family, you're not part of it. Get out, now." I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever had a parent look you in the eye and tell you you only matter if you're useful to them, I see you. That feeling of the floor falling out under you, it stays with you. Hit that subscribe button and drop a "Stay Strong" in the comments. We're telling these stories so that the workhorses of the world know they're not alone. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked past them, up the stairs and into the small room I'd spent 22 years in. I grabbed a duffel bag and shoved in my laptop, my journals, and enough clothes to last a week. I grabbed the manila folder I'd hidden under my mattress, the one with my father's sale documents. As I walked down the stairs for the last time, Jackson was standing in the hallway. He looked at my swollen cheek, then at my bag. He didn't look guilty. He looked relieved. "Sorry, sis," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "But you know how it is. Family helps family." "You aren't family, Jackson," I said, walking past him toward the door. "You're a parasite, and eventually you'll run out of people to bleed dry." My mother tried to grab my arm as I hit the porch. "Clara, it's raining. You have nowhere to go. Stop being so dramatic." I didn't look back. I stepped into the Ohio rain, the cold water soaking through my shirt in seconds. I didn't have a car. They'd never bought me one. I didn't have a college fund. I didn't have a home. But as I heard the front door slam shut and the lock click into place, I felt something I hadn't felt in 22 years. I felt light. I walked 3 miles to the bus station, my feet blistering in my cheap flats. I bought a one-way ticket to Chicago with the cash I'd saved from my construction firm job, the only money they hadn't been able to touch. As the bus pulled out of the station and the lights of my hometown faded into the gray mist, I looked at my reflection in the window. The bruise on my cheek was turning a dark, ugly purple. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was the proof that I finally belonged to myself. The Greyhound bus pulled into Chicago's Union Station at 5:30 a.m. The city was a monster of steel and glass, draped in a thick, suffocating fog. I stepped off that bus with a duffel bag that held my entire life and a bruise on my cheek that felt like a brand. I didn't have a dorm room waiting for me anymore. I didn't have a college fund. I had exactly $412 and the name of a girl I'd met at a construction seminar the year before. I stood on the sidewalk, the wind from Lake Michigan cutting through my thin jacket, and I made myself a promise. I would never be invisible again. I would build a life so tall and so strong that the people who tried to bury me would have to break their necks just to look at the top of it. The first year was a blur of exhaustion. If my parents thought I was a workhorse back in Ohio, they had no idea what that horse could do when she was running for her own life. I found a room in a basement apartment in Pilsen that I shared with 3 other girls. My bed was a mattress on the floor that smelled like damp concrete, but to me it was a throne because my father hadn't paid for it. I worked 3 jobs. I was a waitress at a 24-hour diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., a freelance drafter for a small landscaping company until 8 p.m., and then I spent my nights cleaning offices in the very skyscrapers I dreamed of designing. I learned to live on black coffee and the kind of quiet fury that doesn't let you sleep. Every time my legs ached or my eyes burned from staring at blueprints under a dim lamp, I'd think about Jackson. I'd think about him sitting in that suburban living room, probably driving a new car bought with the money that was supposed to be my tuition. I'd think about my mother setting the table for 4, then realizing there were only 3 of them left, and not even bothering to call me to see if I was alive. That was the hardest part, the silence. For the first 6 months, I checked my phone every hour. I waited for a text, a voicemail, even an angry email demanding I come back and marry Mr. Sterling. But there was nothing. No, "Are you safe?" No, "We're sorry." Not even a happy birthday when December rolled around. My family didn't just disown me, they erased me. I was a ghost they had stopped believing in the moment I stopped being useful. But, like my father once said, the workhorse doesn't stop. I saved every penny. I didn't go to movies, I didn't buy new clothes. I wore my boots until the soles were thin as paper, and I could feel the cold Chicago pavement through them. By the second year, I had saved enough to enroll in a night program at a local technical college to finish my degree. I'd sit in the back of the class, still wearing my waitress uniform, smelling like grease and maple syrup, while the younger students complained about the workload. They didn't know what work was. My breakthrough came when I was 25. I was working as a junior assistant at a mid-sized firm, mostly making copies and fetching lunch for the real architects. A project came in, a restoration of an old library on the south side that everyone said was a lost cause. The budget was non-existent, and the structural damage was extensive. The senior partners didn't want to touch it. I stayed late one night after everyone had gone home, and I redesigned the entire support system using techniques I'd learned while cleaning those skyscraper offices and watching how they were built from the inside out. I left my proposal on the lead architect's desk with a note from the girl who cleans your floors. 2 days later, I was promoted. By 28, I was a partner. By 30, I opened Vance and Associates. I took the name they tried to take from me and I put it in neon lights. We specialized in impossible projects, buildings that were considered broken, useless, or beyond repair, because that's what I was. I was a girl who was considered a backup plan and a sacrifice, and I turned myself into a monument. I built an empire, but I didn't do it in the dark. I kept a navy binder of my own. In it, I kept the receipts of my life. I kept the records of every award I won, every building I completed, and every milestone I reached. But I also kept the other side of the ledger. I kept the screenshots of the 0 phone calls I received. I kept the printouts of my brother's social media posts where he was still bragging about his success when I knew, through the grapevine, that he was burning through my parents' equity. I kept the records of the private investigators I hired every year just to make sure my parents hadn't moved. I wasn't looking for them because I missed them. I was looking for them because I knew that one day the black hole that was Jackson would finally swallow them whole, and they would come looking for the only person who knew how to balance a checkbook. My firm grew from a 3-person office to the top floor of a skyscraper. I bought a home overlooking the lake, a place with so many windows that there were no shadows for my past to hide in. I had friends who became family, people who chose me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. And Jackson? I kept tabs on him. I watched from afar as he crashed and burned through 3 different businesses. I saw him get arrested for a DUI in a car that my father had to take out his second mortgage to pay for. I watched my parents' suburban home go from a place of pride to a place of desperation. They were drowning, and instead of teaching Jackson how to swim, they were just waiting for a life raft to drift by. They didn't realize that the life raft they had thrown away 8 years ago had turned into a battleship. Take a moment here to hit that subscribe button. We all know that success is the best revenge, but it's the silence that makes it sweet. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to build yourself up from nothing after your family told you that you were nothing? I want to read your stories of strength. Now, let's get to the day the elevator door opened and the past walked into my office. It was a Tuesday morning. The air in Chicago was crisp, the kind of day that makes everything look sharp and clear. I was sitting in my office, reviewing the final plans for a new community center, when my assistant, Sarah, buzzed in. "Ms. Vance, there's an elderly couple in the lobby. They don't have an appointment, and they're being quite persistent. They say they're family." I didn't even have to look at the security camera. I knew. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. But it wasn't fear. It was the feeling of a ledger finally being ready to close. I stood up, walked to the glass wall of my office, and looked out into the lobby. There they were, Martha and Gerald Vance. They looked like they belonged in a different century. They looked like they were made of dust, and standing behind them, looking older, heavier, and completely defeated, was Jackson. They had come, not because they loved me, not because they were sorry, but because they had finally run out of other people's dreams to sell, and they had heard that mine was worth millions. I picked up my navy binder from the desk, straightened my blazer, and looked at my reflection. The bruise from 8 years ago was long gone, but the girl who wore it was still there, and she was finally ready to speak. The glass walls of my office offer a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a landscape of steel and ambition that I helped shape. But as I stood there watching the two people in my lobby, the towering skyscrapers felt as fragile as paper. It had been 2,920 days since I walked out into the Ohio rain. 2,920 days of silence. No birthday texts, no "are you alive" calls, nothing. And yet here they were, standing on the Italian marble of my firm's reception, looking like they had just stepped out of a ghost story. My assistant, Sarah, buzzed me again. "Ms. Vance, they're insisting. The gentleman says he's your father, but he doesn't have an appointment. Should I call security?" "No, Sarah," I said, my voice sounding more composed than I felt. "Let them in, and Sarah, bring me the navy blue binder from the bottom drawer of my safe." The door opened, and the air in the room changed. It didn't smell like lemon oil and success anymore. It smelled like suburban Ohio and mothballs. My mother, Martha, walked in first. She had always been a woman who used her appearance as a shield, but the shield was cracked. Her hair was a shade of gray she hadn't quite embraced, and her coat was a season too old for a Chicago spring. My father, Gerald, followed, leaning slightly on a cane. He didn't look at the art on the walls or the high-end furniture. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the old Gerald, the man who thought he could command the world with a scowl. "Clara," my mother whispered. She took a step toward me, her hands reaching out in a rehearsed gesture of maternal longing. "Look at you. We saw your name in that magazine. We didn't believe it at first. Our little Clara, a CEO?" I didn't move. I didn't offer a hug. I stayed behind my mahogany desk, the one I paid for with 3 years of double shifts and 5 years of sleepless nights. "It's Miss Vance in this building, Martha. Why are you here?" My father cleared his throat, a sound that used to make me flinch. Now it just sounded like a rattle. "We've had a difficult time, Clara, a very difficult time. The economy and the house, things haven't gone the way we planned." "What you mean is Jackson hasn't gone the way you planned," I corrected. The mention of my brother's name made my mother flinch. She sat down in one of the guest chairs, her shoulders sagging. "He's in a bad way, honey. He had a legal complication, a DUI that turned into something more. Your father had to take out a second mortgage to pay the lawyers. And then the investment he made, the one we all had high hopes for, it collapsed." I felt a cold wave of déjà vu. This was the same script from 8 years ago. Different debt, same excuses. Jackson was the star who couldn't shine, and I was the workhorse they had come to hitch to the plow one more time. My mother leaned forward, her eyes wet with those performative tears I knew so well. "We heard your firm is growing. We saw the job listings online. We thought, since you're family, you could give Jackson a position. Nothing major, just a senior manager role, something with a good salary to help us pay off the mortgage. He's your brother, Clara. Family helps family." The audacity of it was almost breathtaking. They hadn't come to apologize for the night they tried to sell me to Arthur Sterling. They hadn't come to ask how I survived on $400 in a city that eats the weak. They came because the numbers had changed and I was the only asset they had left. "You want me to hire the man who sat and watched while you disowned me? The man who spent my tuition on a car he crashed?" "That's in the past," my father snapped, the old anger flickering for a second. "We're talking about the future. You have millions, Clara. We saw the IPO filing." "You have more money than this entire town back home. It wouldn't hurt you to help your own flesh and blood." "It's not about the money, Gerald," I said, leaning back. "It's about the receipts. Sarah?" My assistant walked in and placed the navy blue binder on my desk. It was thick, heavy, and filled with 8 years of documented silence. I looked at my parents, two people who had erased me until I became too expensive to ignore. You brought a request, I said, tapping the binder, but I've been keeping a record. Before we talk about Jackson's job, let's talk about the 2,920 days you forgot I existed. I watched Jackson as he sat in the designer leather chair across from my desk. 8 years ago, he was the star, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Now, he looked like a faded poster, puffy-faced, wearing a suit that was clearly too tight, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking at my computer monitors, probably trying to calculate how much the hardware alone was worth. So, Clara, Jackson started, leaning back with a forced casualness that made my skin crawl, I've heard great things about Vance and Associates. I figure with my people skills and your, technical stuff, we'd be an unstoppable team. I was thinking a senior project manager role, something where I can lead. I didn't answer him. Instead, I looked at my father. Senior project manager? Jackson hasn't managed to keep a single job for more than 6 months in Ohio, but you think he can lead a multi-million-dollar architecture firm in Chicago? He just needs a fresh start, Clara, my mother interrupted, her voice rising in that familiar, frantic pitch. He's family. You have over 100 employees. You're telling me you can't find one spot for your own brother after all the sacrifices we made for you? Sacrifices? I whispered the word. It felt heavy, like a stone in my mouth. Let's talk about those sacrifices. Sarah brought me exactly what I needed. I placed the navy blue binder on the mahogany desk. It landed with a loud, final thud. This binder wasn't just a collection of paper, it was the ledger of my erasure. I have a list too, Mom, I said, flipping open the first tab. You brought a list of debts and demands. I brought a record of the price you put on my life. I turned to the first page, the intent to marry document my father had signed for Mr. Sterling. Item 1, July 14th, 8 years ago. You tried to sell your daughter for $300,000 to cover Jackson's gambling debts. You called it securing the family's future. My father's face turned a deep, ugly shade of red. That was a business arrangement, Clara. We were in a corner. We did what we had to do. No, I corrected him, my voice as cold as the glass walls around us. You did what was easy. You chose the star, and you tried to slaughter the workhorse, but the horse ran away. I flipped to the next tab. Item 2 through 10, every single birthday and Christmas card I sent for the first 3 years. Every single one came back stamped return to sender. You didn't even open them to see if I was okay. You didn't care if I was sleeping on a bus station floor or eating out of a dumpster. Jackson shifted in his seat, looking at his phone. Look, can we just skip the history lesson? Are you going to give me the job or what? We're family, Clara. Family helps family. That's what you always said, right? I want to stop here for a second. Have you ever had a family member use the word family as a weapon to get what they want right after they treated you like a stranger? Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand your ground against people who only remembered your name when they saw your success. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the most audacious thing your family asked for after disowning you? I'm reading every single one. You're right, Jackson, I said, leaning forward until we were eye to eye. Family does help family. But you see, 8 years ago, you told me I wasn't one of us anymore. You stood in that hallway and watched me walk into the rain with a bruise on my face and $400 in my pocket. You didn't help me then. Why should I help you now? We're your parents, my father roared, standing up and slamming his cane against the floor. We gave you life. We fed you. We clothed you. You owe us. I paid that debt the night I lost my college fund to Jackson's lawyers. I paid it when I spent 3 years working 20-hour days to rebuild the education you stole from me. This binder, this is the receipt that shows I owe you absolutely nothing. I pulled out a final sheet of paper, the printed screenshots of Jackson's social media from last year, showing him on a jet ski he bought while my parents were losing their home. You want a management role, Jackson? Manage the fact that you've bled our parents dry. Manage the fact that you're 32 years old and still expecting a sister you disowned to save you. My mother started to cry, the theatrical, loud sobbing she used to end every argument she was losing. How can you be so cold? We have nowhere else to go. The bank is taking the house in 2 weeks. Then I suggest you start packing, because this interview is over. The silence that followed my words was heavy, the kind of pressurized silence that happens when the truth finally takes up all the oxygen in a room. My father looked at the navy blue binder, then at the expensive marble floor, and finally at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the star's father. I saw an old man who had gambled his daughter's future and lost. He didn't apologize. He didn't even try. He simply turned his back and walked towards the elevator, his cane clicking against the floor in a rhythm that sounded like a final, hollow goodbye. My mother hesitated for a second. She looked at me, her eyes wet, her mouth opening as if to try one last rehearsed guilt trip. But then she looked at my face, the face of the woman who had survived the rain, the 2 a.m. waitress shifts, and the 100-hour work weeks. She saw that the backup plan was dead. She followed my father without a word. Jackson was the last one left. He stood there, his jaw working, looking around my office one last time with a mixture of greed and hatred. "You always were a stuck-up brat," he hissed, the star finally burning out in a flash of petty resentment. He turned and ran after them, a man still looking for a shortcut that didn't exist. I stood by my glass wall and watched them walk out of the building, 42 floors below. They looked so small from up here, like ants lost in a city that didn't care about their names. I wasn't happy and I wasn't sad. I just felt level. The ledger was finally balanced, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't owe anyone a single cent of my soul. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story reminded you of your own worth, or if it gave you the strength to stand up to a family that only sees you as a function, then our time together was worth it. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of survivors. We are the architects of our own lives, and we don't need permission from people who didn't believe in our foundation. Drop a final "I am enough" in the comments. I read every single one because your voice is the most important thing you own. In the end, my father was right about one thing. He told me to build something they couldn't ignore. I did. I built a life where their silence is no longer a punishment, but a gift. I am Clara Vance. I am not a workhorse. I am the designer of my own destiny.